Intermittent fasting. We've spoke a lot about trends and things like that over the past couple of weeks, so now this has got to be about intermittent fasting. As a technique to lose weight, it's probably my favourite technique. It's probably one that holds up the best. I think a lot of people do find success with it. There's nothing magic or fancy about intermittent fasting. It's basically just skipping a meal. You can't just call it skipping a meal though. Some fucker has named it, and he's probably getting royalties for it, because you have to name everything these days. So with intermittent fasting, rather than focus on what you eat, you focus more on when. We'll explain it a little bit more in this video, because we love to rip the arse out of it, and we love to stretch things out. Seats fucked. There's basically a period or a window in which you decide to eat it, or a period when you don't eat. So the most common of intermittent fasting is the 16-8 method. What that essentially is 16 hours of not eating and then 8 hours of eating. 16 hours sounds like an absolute eternity, but you should be sleeping about 8 of them anyway. 10 if you're single because you have absolutely zero interruptions. 6 if you have kids if you're lucky, and 4 if you're in a relationship because so the 16-8 is the most common ratio. The window is completely up to yourself and how you set it up and how your day goes. So you could do 17-7, or you could do 18-6, or 19-5, you get the point. I have examples of the window being 8 hours between the hours of 10 and 6. 10 hours between the hours of 9 and 7, and 6 hours between the hours of 11 and 5. So when you mention fasting, I've heard people online say fasting creates this euphoric feeling like drugs and all that sort of shit, but the fact of the matter is it helps people lose weight. Those kind of like euphoric feelings, I'm assuming, are just like added benefits to some people, I guess, but I've never took any drugs. I think I'd be even more annoying than what I am already. People talk about the benefits of fasting with like mental clarity and things like that, but I think the mental clarity comes from not being in any sort of food coma, not having to digest any foods. And I would imagine it's got something to do with all your energy just going to use your brain and physical energy rather than it being used for digestion. It's just a thought, nothing to back that up. I'm no bashing fasting. I don't think it's a bad idea for people to do every so often, just for practice. But having any sort of benefits beyond that, I don't think there's many. Actually, in the past year, I've fasted for a few days. I think the most I've done was maybe 36 hours. But personally, I think it's a good idea just to prove to yourself it can be done and that you're not dependent on food or relying on food. You know, our ancestors went for fucking days without food. People feel like they have to eat every couple of hours or feel like they can't not eat for a few hours. It's fucking bonkers. Ultimately, it just shows that hunger is just a feeling. And I just done it just out of curiosity. I guess this is obviously part of the fasting umbrella. There's different names for different types of fasting. We'll talk about a few of the other fasting techniques as well here. A common one is alternative days of fasting. So one day you'll eat normally and then the next day you'll either eat restricted or you won't eat anything at all. There's a 5-2 diet. For 5 days you would eat very small amounts of food, and then on 2 days you would eat normally. I personally don't do any of these. I just like to keep it simple. But if you fancy it and you think you could stick to any of these techniques, go for it. As always though, just like a diet, if you're interested, create a fasting protocol that suits you and your lifestyle. You could do it a few days of your week, just so you lower your overall total calories that you've consumed. And fasting still abides by the calories in versus calories out. So if you're not in a deficit, you're not losing weight. Which leads us on to the downsides. There's not many downsides. See, all you're really doing is reducing your eating window. How many fucking downsides could there be? I've managed to find a few anyway. So people may just be hungry, and obviously it's technically still a feeling. But I would challenge anybody in the morning. See if you're absolutely starving in the morning, drink a litre of cold water and see how you feel. I guarantee you'd feel full. Or you would feel full enough to get to your next meal whenever it is. If you're waking up at 7 and you have a litre of water, that would easily get you to 10, 11 in the morning. I think people massively underestimate what hydration can do to keep you full. A massive one as well is people can still overeat. So they may compensate in that window. If you narrow your eating window, the idea is that you would eat less calories. So if they've knocked 4 hours off their usual eating windows, they can still consume a fuckload of calories within this smaller eating window. So people can still overeat. They may compensate in this window for the calories that they've missed. Also, if the feeling of hunger is persistent, they might just go fuck this and go absolutely mental within this window. But they would still be abiding by the windowed eating. So they'd still technically be sticking to the rules. But if you were eating between the hours, just say, for example, between the hours of 8 in the morning and 10 at night, and you were consuming 3,000 calories, let's just say, but then you started eating between the hours of 11 in the morning and 6 at night, but you consume 3,500 calories, you're still technically intermittent fasting, but you're just eating a fuckload more calories within your window, and that can happen. So it's obviously not a certain way of losing weight. It's no magic. Magic doesn't exist, especially in health. All that exists when it comes to your health is hard work. If it wasn't hard, we'd all be Slim Jims, wouldn't we? And on the subject of health, I'd personally say intermittent fasting is only for people trying to lose. If you're trying to gain weight, it doesn't really make sense for the intermittent fast because you're trying to eat more calories rather than save them. You're obviously then wanting regular protein servings to try and build muscle, ideally. I guess if you were the kind of person who was constantly overeating, even on a surplus, you could maybe do it to try and still lower your calorie intake. If you're trying to gain weight, and I would assume you'd be then trying to build muscle, you should be having protein at regular intervals to give yourself the best possible chance of growing muscle. But as always, it's just another tool in the toolbox. So when I'm losing weight, I eat around about 11 o'clock. I stretch that first feeding out as long as possible. So then after that, I don't then have to wait long for my next meal. Personally, I've found recently that eating fats helps me stay fuller throughout the day as well. So fats from eggs, that was kind of a revelation for me the past few months. So we'll go through how to set up intermittent fasting. Obviously first, pick a window that suits you. So you can follow this without finding out your calories. You'll obviously then lose weight. If you're carrying this out and not losing weight, it's maybe worth then figuring out your calories using a calculator online and then following those numbers within your window. If you're going to start doing different days and things like that, the 5-2 diet or the alternative fasting days and things like that, I'd plan these things out in advance and then factor in your calories. Obviously, to get as much bang for your buck with foods, stick with foods with high volume, high satiation, high protein, salads, chicken, fruit, obviously the usual. I'd say plan ahead because I think techniques like this aren't that successful if you've not got a plan in place. Obviously take advantage of calorie-free liquids within reason to help you feel full during times of not eating. Try and keep as much variety in this window as possible. I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but prioritise protein. You technically could be eating less overall calories, so try and keep protein as high as possible within reason. You're likely not eating enough already. So, quick pros and cons. Pros to intermittent fasting, it can create an easy calorie deficit for you technically. Some people respond really well to lower calories and they actually don't feel hungry. There's some success with extreme dieting, so having maybe 400, 500, 600 calories a day. That's obviously for another video, but people do respond well to not eating that much during the day. Giving someone simple guidelines like intermittent fasting and tell them, can you try and eat between the hours of 10 and 6, for example, might help them stick to a diet better. It's a very good entry-level technique to implement. If you finish eating at a reasonable hour at night, it's unlikely going to impact your sleep. When people cram in a fuckload of food right before they go to bed, they could have heartburn and acid reflux and stuff like that. You eating far away from when you go to sleep, you're unlikely going to get those issues. Intermittent fasting as well is probably a good time to get in tune with your body and learn how to satisfy yourself when it comes to eating. Good eating healthy practices, meaning take your time when you're eating, genuinely appreciate some food, enjoy it, hydrate well. All good techniques to help you stay fuller for longer, which then should help you throughout the rest of your life. Cons, if you're narrowing the window of when you're eating, you could then potentially narrow the amount of food you're actually eating, the variety in it, so you might then start lacking vitamins and minerals. So it's just something to be wary of. If you're a person that can't handle the feeling of hunger, it might not be a good idea for you. People may still overeat in this period. It might completely negate a calorie deficit. It still has to be managed and monitored. It's not for everybody. People with eating disorders, pregnant women, or people, you can't fucking say women now, can you? People with medical conditions and things like that. I put this in the con. It's kind of not a con, but it's just something to be aware of. Weight fluctuations, as always, if you're manipulating your food, eating less overall food weight, lowering carbs, which will then affect your water weight, all these kind of things will likely show up on the scales. So again, be mindful. Weigh yourself a few times over the course of a week. Take the average. Simple as that. It may affect your social life as well. You might have to adjust to suit, especially if you're doing the alternating days. You're not landing a date and not eat much and you've got a date night. You've got to turn down that date night because you're fasting. Don't think so. Woman says to you, you want to come back to mine for a dessert? And you go, no thanks, I'm fasting. Don't fucking think so. As always, it's not perfect. It's just another option for you to consider. I will see you in the next video.